This interview will be so different than any of the other 131 Everything Saxophone podcast episodes ever. Welcome to episode 132 of the Everything Saxophone podcast. I'm Donna Schwartz, I'm your host, and I bring you one-of-a-kind, in-depth interviews with world-class performers of all genres, music educators, and industry leaders in the saxophone world. Now today, it's going to be a bit different. We're going to travel to Europe, actually Italy to be exact. A veteran of the international jazz scene, Max Ionata, emerged in the early 1990s and has performed with many modern greats, including Robin Eubanks, Billy Hart, Joe Locke, Mike Stern, Bob Mintzer, and compatriot Stefano Di Battista. Now, this interview will be different than any other one I've ever done for all the other 131 episodes that I've done for the show. You see, Max is so busy, it would have been almost impossible to have him sit down to do a chat. But he was really nice. He offered to answer my questions if I wrote them down and sent them to him, and he would write them back to me. Now, originally, I was just going to create an article on my saxophonepodcast.com site, but after polling our Patreon supporters, those are the people that support the podcast with a minimal donation of like $2 or more to keep these interviews going, after I polled them, they encouraged me to read his answers aloud. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read my questions and his answers as part of the episode today. And what I'll also do is play the music from one of his recent releases with Swiss bassist and bandleader Dominic Sherman's trio. Now, the album is called Moons Ago, and it features 12 original compositions steeped in the spirit of 1950s, 60s jazz. In fact, right now, you're listening to the title track, Moons Ago. Now, we also talked about why he started on soprano saxophone and not the alto saxophone, the earliest records he listened to that impacted his playing, how he keeps his tone sounding so full and lush, the one lesson that Max teaches his students that he feels is mandatory for them to understand, one improvisation exercise that he practices frequently, and there's really just so much more. Now, before I get to the actual episode, let me get to the shout-outs of the week. And the first one comes from Laura, and it's from the Maddie Steckler episode 109. I guess I'm binge listening to these podcasts. Yes, she is, and I'm sharing another comment that she shared as well. So she says, this is my second one today. From the interview, I was thinking I wouldn't care for his music since I like more straight-ahead jazz, but I checked it out online, gave it a chance, and while not in my usual wheelhouse, I actually enjoyed much of it due to all the tones and the colors that he employs. Plus, he mentioned a lot of artists that were or are familiar to me here in Connecticut. Just proves that keeping the ears open can bring some nice surprises. Yeah, that's gold right there for sure. Thank you. Now, here's another one from Laura, and this is from the Camille Thurman episode number 87. She says, "Oh my goodness, Camille, can I call her Thermy too, is the bomb." I thought that was so funny. That's awesome. She says, and I mean that with the utmost respect. She's a warrior on saxophone and in life. She makes me want to be her friend. She overcame so much during her formative playing years and is so deserving of every success. I totally agree. Man, Camille was just awesome, is awesome. She says, great inspirational and captivating storyteller, the tenor in the ant's closet. Not to mention her playing, I just checked out several of her videos as well as a few educational ones that are aimed at students. There will never be another you, quote unquote, or another Camille. Fantastic interview, thanks. Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks for binge listening, watching, and all that stuff. We really appreciate it and love the comments and love the feedback. It's so great. And this other comment was from Charles Benoit, hopefully I'm saying that right, for the Tim Armacost episode number 129. He writes, I love how you give the interviewees the space to think and allow them to take the conversation in unplanned directions. You know what? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I was just saying to somebody earlier today that I want these interviews to feel like you're a fly on the wall with our conversations. And I'm hoping that comes across because all the people that I've interviewed are just so special. And they're humble, and they're kind, and they're nice, and they're generous with their time, and they're generous with their information. And I hope that you continue to get that from this podcast. Thanks so much, Charles. All right, so if you want to be featured in the shout out of the week, hey, leave a comment on our website under the each episode's article, saxophonepodcast.com. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/everythingsaxophone. You can go to the Apple Podcasts app and leave a comment there as well, or really anywhere that you listen to this podcast. That would be great, and you'll be featured in the shout out of the week. Oh, and also, please go to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button. That would be awesome. We love having more subscribers, and comments that are left there we also read as well. Now, if you want to support this podcast and keep these great interviews coming, become a patron. Patrons are people that support the channel, small monthly donation of $2 or more, and it helps to defray the costs of hosting the podcast, putting it on, and all the software that we have to use in order to produce the podcast. Just go to patreon.com/everythingsaxophone. That's one word. So it's patreon.com/everythingsaxophone. Now, not only are you supporting the podcast, and we really, really appreciate you, but you also get to vote on how we do certain things here. And you also get access to a ton of bonus lessons. In fact, Laura, who's been leaving a lot of comments, has said, you really need to push what you're putting on that Patreon site, Donna. There's a lot of stuff on here. And yes, there are. There's a lot of bonus episodes, bonus content. You also get searchable transcripts for many of the episodes on there as well as a listing of all the 132 episodes too, because a lot of people ask us about that. So once again, head on over to patreon.com/everythingsaxophone, one word, to do that. All right, let's get to me reading Max's answers to my questions. All right, to start with, we're going to be listening to Butterflies, and this is composed by Dominic Sherman. So my first question to Max was, so I'm curious as to how you got started in music. Were your parents musical? Perhaps you didn't start on saxophone. When did you start on it? And Max's answer was this. In my family, there are no musicians or amateurs, and nobody, even in the past, was a music lover in general. So probably I can be considered an atypical musician. And as a side note, I had the same exact experience. Okay, he goes on. Because every time I compare myself with some colleague, I discover that in their families, there was someone who played some musical instrument. I started playing when I was 8, thanks to a man that in my little village in Italy decided to put together a marching band. In the beginning, he asked us which instrument we would like to play, but in the end, he gave us the instrument he needed in the band. How typical. I was very lucky because I asked for a saxophone and he brought a soprano saxophone. In the beginning, I thought it was a trumpet, but I was so excited about the new toy that I was looking forward to blowing into it. It's really funny. Now, I had a follow-up question. I said, I'm surprised you started on soprano saxophone. That's really hard to keep in tune. Can you tell us about those early experiences and how you handled playing it as a beginner? When did you start playing tenor and alto? This is what Max wrote. He said, actually, it was a challenge for me at that time. I remember that my family and all the neighbors were a bit stressed because I was practicing a lot just to try to play my first notes. After a few months, the director of the marching band asked me to join them to play in a religious celebration in my town. And I was very excited and I couldn't believe that it was happening. Was I ready to play? No, I wasn't. He asked me to play just on a couple of very simple tunes, and he told me to look at the soprano player beside me that was older than me and more experienced. This thing helped me to develop my playing so fast, and after a while, I was able to play almost all the repertoire. The love for the tenor sax comes after a couple of years when another boy that was playing a tenor in the band asked me to do an exchange with his instrument. I remember that the tenor sax for me was so long that it was difficult for me to play and march at the same time. I was just 10 years old. Now, I played an alto as well, and that happened to be my first Selmer saxophone when I decided to do the entrance exam to the conservatory in Pescara, near my hometown. It was a failure for me because they never admitted me to the conservatory because at the time, There was only the classical class, and my way of playing was a bit unruly. Okay, the next tune we're going to listen to, by the way, is called Rainy Summer. Now, if you're curious as to where to purchase these recordings, we'll have links. I'll mention it at the end of the show. So my second question was, which teacher was your biggest influence when you were young? And what was one thing that they said that you still do today, if anything? And so his response was, living in a little village in the middle 1980s meant I didn't have big influences on music. The main bands were playing folk music or a kind of pop music, and the only way to listen to jazz was with recordings. I spent a lot of time with a few friends transcribing some melodies from the recordings and then trying to play them all together, having no idea how to improvise. Once in school, the music teacher told me I was talented for music, but he said, if you want to be a musician, you should dedicate your time to study music seriously, and you must learn to read music as well. The combination of this with your talent can help you to be a good musician. Otherwise, you'll always be an amateur. And Max says, I never forgot this advice. So I asked him a follow-up question. I said, well, what were some of those first records that you listened to? So he said, one of my best friends was a guitar player, and he loved Mike Stern. That was the period that Stern was playing with Bob Berg, and to me, it was love at first sight. We tried to play with other, friends that played drum and bass, those melodies from Bob Berg and Mike Stern. And I remember that on the solo parts, we were used to playing on a pedal because no one of us was able to play on the changes. Meaning that, just as an aside, meaning like playing on pedal tones and stuff like that, pedal notes. So he says, later, my first meeting with a teacher that showed me how the scales work in harmony opened up a whole new world to me. Someone then lent me my first Dexter Gordon recording that was Go. That was Dexter Gordon's album Go. And from that moment on, I decided that was the way that I wanted to play. So next up is Autumn Breath, and I picked this because of the question that I had asked him. So my comment was, you have a lovely tone, and it's really lush. It's just so full. What are some exercises that you practice every day without fail to keep your tone so even and full throughout the range of the horn? And Max said, I think the best way to have a good sound is to practice every day with the full sound without limitations. I mean, all of us live in apartments and all of us have neighbors that probably aren't happy to have a saxophone player next to them. And this is a big limitation for us because we always blow into the horn feeling guilty. We must find the best environment to play completely free, even just one note, but exactly like in a live performance. I always found a way to have my own space to practice, and when it was impossible, I practiced outdoors. A very useful place is in the woods, for example, where the sound is lost in the air. So, of course, I had a follow-up question. I said, so when you play, are you thinking about how you're pushing the air through the horn? Do you have any special breathing or tone exercises, aside from long tones, that you do every day? And he says, I've aged, but I didn't lose my nature. I'm still undisciplined, and all the way that I play, especially all the sound features, are absolutely natural. I never dedicated myself to practicing the tone, per se. I can say something for sure, though. I'm never happy about my tone, and that's why I choose to change horns and mouthpieces very often. I have a tone in my mind that I feel like I still haven't gotten. And I had commented to him about that separately in an email. He wrote, this was a couple months ago, he wrote, "Just yesterday I got a new, quote-unquote, new horn, a beautiful Mark VI from the 60s. Now probably in a few days, I'll find out that it's exactly the same as the previous one. I've been playing a silver 1950 SBA for the last 4 years, and this is a Mark VI from the 60s. I meant that this is proof that I'm never completely happy about my tone. Maybe I just feel bored after a while, and to be honest, it's beautiful to start a new period with a new friend." Let's listen to a little bit of Afternoon Song. So my next question to Max was, when did you get started with improvisation? Who was your favorite person to listen to? And I wrote, I'm wondering how much Dexter Gordon influenced you. Hint, hint, because that's what I was kind of hearing in his sound. And here was his response to that. He said, I'm a big fan of Dexter, and of course Sonny Rollins, Stan Getz, Hank Mobley, Coltrane, and all those giants of the tenor saxophone history. They are the true improvisers. They always took risks during their solos, and probably this is the best example we should follow. I'm mainly a self-taught improviser, and most of the things you listen to in my playing is what I feel to play by ear, but of course, I studied improvisation. That's what I teach today at the conservatory here in Italy. The main teachers for me are the pianists I play with, like Luca Manuzza, Giovanni Mazzarino, or Dado Moroni. Piano players have a different perspective than other musicians, and they deeply understand harmony, and of course are the best teachers for us. That was a really cool answer. Listen to this next part of this afternoon song. I love the use of sequences in his playing. It really ties everything together. It's just so cool. Let's check out another tune. This one's called Heureka. I hope I'm saying that right. Heureka. My next question to Max was, what's one lesson that you teach your students that you feel is mandatory for them to understand? And his response was this. He said, often students ask me how they can play well on the changes, and I tell them that when we improvise, we're training our brain and not our fingers. So the best way to learn is to line the difficulty of the tune to our brain's ability to follow the changes. To learn to play on a fast tempo, the first thing we must do is to learn to play on a slow tempo. So for example, I asked them to play on Cherokee starting at 50 beats per minute on the metronome, having the same articulation of a 300 beat per minute tune. I mean with even notes not swinging. He says, I was shocked when I slowed down a Stan Getz solo on a very fast tune, and incredibly, the solo was working great even at that tempo. This means that when our solo works at 50 beats per minute, we just need to practice to increase the tempo day by day. Now, that honestly blew me away when he said that. I actually said to him, that's a great story about slowing down. Stan gets his solo. And he wrote, it isn't the same though as with Train, for example. He has another kind of approach on the tempo. So I thought that was interesting. And I said, that's interesting. How would you approach a John Coltrane tune? And he said, the best way is always just to blow on the recording and try to follow it. And so then I said, well, do you have any favorite players that you're listening to now? And he says, of course, there's many great players that I love. Probably my favorite one right now is Seamus Blake. He can play everything, and he fits perfectly in the music he's playing, from traditional to super modern. Let's listen to Malia's Waltz next. So my next question to Max was this: what is one improvisation exercise you practice frequently that you would recommend to our listeners? So he replied, an exercise that I do often is playing on a tune without the backing track. And I try to be as clear as I can on the harmony, playing every single chord and keeping the routine for a long time. In this way, when I play with other musicians, I feel free to play over the changes, and everything seems to be simpler because I don't have to fill out all the space. When I play a gig, the goal for me is to speak with the audience with an understandable language. If I'm able to do this, the mission's complete. That's why it's important to be able to play well on the harmony, even when you play alone. I'm hoping that you're hearing how clear his playing is over the harmony. Let's listen to another song, very unusual title. It's called Coffee Cat. So my next question was, how did you get involved in the Swiss double bassist Dominic Sherman's project Moons Ago, which, by the way, again, is the title of the album. It's the title of the album that you're listening to right now. So Max said, when someone asks me to be involved in a new project, usually I ask to listen to the music, because often what happens is that people call you without considering your style of playing. And sometimes I find myself playing music that's too distant, that's so distant to me. Dominic contacted me one day because he listened to something on my YouTube channel. And when he sent me some links to other recordings he released, I was very happy because he's a brilliant composer and a great player too. We recorded an album with 12 tunes in just one day, like a band that used to play together every day. Wow, that's incredible. The other two musicians involved are two wonderful young people, Yuri Storion on piano and Jonas Janalkanis on drums. I probably butchered your name, Jonas. I'm so sorry. It's a very difficult spelling. Max goes on to say, this is the power of the music. When everything works well, you just have to blow and everything happens. For my follow-up question, let's listen to Ramba Samba, and you'll see why I chose this in a minute. So my next question to Max was, do you have a favorite song on that Moons Ago album? And he said, this is a 12 original songs album. All the compositions are written by Dominic Sherman, the leader and bass player of the album, and his way of writing music is absolutely fantastic. 12 beautiful tunes that all have the taste of the great standards, the great jazz standards, with both wonderful harmony changes and melodies. If I have to choose one of them, I think I would choose Ramba Samba, a beautiful melodic song that you just keep singing once you've listened to it. All right, that's just so cool in my opinion. All right, but next up, let's listen to another tune from this album. Let's listen to another title that's a weird one, Banana Dog. There's lots of animal and insect songs on this album, by the way. So I asked Max, what other projects do you have coming up this year? And he said, I did a UK tour of gigs and jazz clubs all over the country earlier this year. And in April, he toured with his Danish trio in Spain. His trio consists of Jesper Bodilsen and Martin Moretti Andersen, both fantastic Danish musicians. In the meantime, he said, I have many gigs here in Italy with a new quartet. And at the end of this year, I'll be on tour with Dominic Sherman to present Moons Ago between the countries of Switzerland and Germany. Our next song, our last song actually up, is another funny title, The End of a Bug Affair. Max what his setup was. He talked a little bit about this before, but he said, I'm working with Selmer Paris for some future projects, and this is so exciting for me because all of us know how very well what Selmer is, the company is. He said he made a presentation video of the new entry price Axis tenor saxophone, that's AXOS. He made a video of the new entry price Axis tenor saxophone for them, and it was a beautiful experience for me. Mainly, I play with the Super Balanced Action Silver from 1950. At the moment, I'm playing with a mouthpiece that Vincent Toner from London made for me, a kind of old Otto Link with a very special curve that plays amazingly. It's a 7-star tip opening. And he also uses Diodario's number 4 unfiled reeds and a classical BG ligature. Now, I also asked him, where can people find you online? Can you give us your links to your website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of thing? So those links are going to be on saxophonepodcast.com for the article for this episode. So you'll see them there. But I also asked him, where can people buy your recordings? Because if you've been listening to this podcast, I'm loving his music and I'm hoping that you're loving it too. So you can find him on Amazon, Spotify, or the John Doe Music label website. That's JANDO Music. So johndoemusic.com. We'll put that link also in the show notes as well, because there's a little bit more to that URL. And that's it. That's the end of the written interview that I had with Max Ionata. Now, for me, one comment that really stuck out was when Max was talking about how his students would always ask him about playing over the changes, and he said, when we improvise, we are training our brain and not our fingers. Now that is good stuff. I want to know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. Just comment on our website, saxophonepodcast.com, our Facebook page, our YouTube channel. on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you listen to us, wherever you listen to the podcast. We'd really appreciate it. And if you really like this episode, hey, share it with your friends. Share it with your music educator friends, your saxophone playing friends, other saxophone enthusiasts. Leave a review on Apple Music, Podbean, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if you want more bonus episodes and transcripts, searchable transcripts, and all that extra content that Laura was talking about, head on over to patreon.com/everythingsaxophone. Small donation each month and you get access to so many things. It's really a whole plethora of stuff. So listen, once again, thanks so much for spending your time with us. I hope you enjoyed this special, unique episode. And on that note, take care. Have a great day.